Just a
Oh,
minute.
look, Max. Oh,
Who's that right there? Wait, no, here. She's on the screen. Here, I'll give you a piece of cheese. Come on the bed. Good boy. I did a time lapse grooming him. I'm going to put that in the show. It's called Camera Ready.
I am full focus. I told everyone I am out.
Look nice.
And someone said, oh, what? You're doing a quick run to Trader Joe's? You can't go. You have to.
Max, right now back here. We're not done. Come on, Max, let's go. Come. I got cheese. Come, I got cheese, buddy. Come on. Okay, good boy. Now you stay. Yes, because you got your cheese. Yes. All right.
Good.
Hello, welcome to Gen Zoomers, real talk on just about anything. I'm Sharon.
And I'm Julie.
Julie's a Gen Xer and I'm a boomer. We're best friends and hence Gen Zoomers. This episode, we're going to be featuring Dr. Mary Beth Minter. She's a holistic veterinarian and has been practicing since 1998. I met her maybe about 17 years ago. She's been instrumental in helping us along with our fur babies.
Yeah.
And as you can see, I don't know how long he'll stay here. I think he thinks he's being punished right now. This is Maximilian. When he was a puppy, we went to Mary Beth's ranch. She examined him and she's been helping us along the way. Look at how good he looks. He's 10 years old.
Hey, Sharon.
Hi, this is Julie.
Hi, Mary Beth. Hi.
Hi, Julie. How you doing? Oh, there's Max.
Well,
Hi,
he can't hear you right now because I have my earbuds in. But hold on, I'll take him out and you can say hi. Just a moment. Okay, go ahead.
Hey, Max. How you doing? Hello. Hey, Max.
Who's that?
Yeah.
He's like, should
He
I
hears me.
should I scold me? Okay, Max. That's good. They're here, Dr. Minter.
He says, "Oh my goodness."
Is it Mary Beth? Yes. Yes, you just saw Mary Beth. Okay. Yeah.
He says, all right.
Thank you for joining us. Julie and I are excited to have you on the show. And I think this will be a good show because I think there's a lot of people out there that would like to know what is holistic veterinarian medicine, particularly your brand. So why don't you share with us your background?
Yeah, I went to Colorado State in the late 80s. There isn't yet really a holistic program. So vets that have interest in that have to seek it out on their own after graduation. There are more and more like holistic clubs in vet schools, and there are some, and now what's better is continuing education through our accredited or validated holistic associations are being accepted. So, there's a lot to go, but went into practice and I was doing my veterinary thing. I didn't really think out of the box, like this is what you're supposed to do and this is how you do it. I mean, it's how you're taught and it's still pretty much the same. This is, what the current state of medicine is in veterinary medicine. It's very similar to human medicine, right?
Right.
So I practiced with various practices. And then in the 90s, ended up in Denver. And I was just sort of disillusioned. I can't say exactly if it was because I didn't feel like I was making a difference. Now I know, looking back, I could see what my obstacles really were. But I just sort of, it was just sort of constant. I didn't like that how, you're on call, how it was just kind of like, you didn't have much time with patients. It was like a burnout, I think, really what it was. And when I was in Colorado State, my class was the first class that had half women and half men. So it was sort of interesting. And now it's mostly, there's more women in veterinary school.
I looked that up earlier this week.
Yeah.
I was curious, women versus men, and there are more women practicing.
Yeah.
It's close though. It was something like 52% women.
And it's still like the whole thing, if you work for another practitioner, if it's a man, there's still a struggle with the pay scale. There's veterinarians really, unless they're in a big practice or work for a corporation, it's not a quote money making. It's a lot of time involved and a lot of giving, unless you have a situation where you have a lot of associates and you can divide up the work, and that on call can be very, parsed out it just depends on there's a lot more corporation practices now, which are sort of, it's not very conducive to, holistic, it's a system, just like our system in medicine. So anyway, so in the 90s, I just I didn't like it. I went for another degree. I was starting another degree. I went into public health, thinking I was gonna, get into epidemiology. And I was basically the token vet in the class. I didn't finish the degree. I enjoyed it. It was, being back in kind of academia. Then personal things happened. At the same time, I was also working at a human research hospital. That was interesting. I had the background to do that kind of stuff, but it was all like that formative time. And I was like, what am I doing here? My values were, I think I was just trying to figure it out. Like where did I want to go back to? And I think my values always were more organic roots. And I ended up in Jackson, Wyoming. And I sort of like floundered around for a while. That's where I met you, Sharon.
Yes.
Yeah. At the time I hadn't started anything. I was doing lots of odd jobs that like you do when you go to Jackson and you're in your 30s and your 40s, and you just do whatever it is to make money, like get by. And I loved living in a little cabin, and it was great,
Oh, you had the best little cabin. You were out in Kelly.
I was in Kelly.
Yes, that's a bohemian part of Jackson Hole.
So was Victor. Well, you were too.
Well, yes, we were in Victor. Yes.
You had some bohemianness.
Yeah, and yes, you got it. You got it. I'm great bohemians there. Yes.
Yeah. And I was in that cabin. I really loved it. And then I just decided I was going to start my own mobile veterinary practice, but it was started conventionally, doing regular quote veterinary medicine. But then I sort of reflected back on, I've always had interest in quote holistic medicine. I didn't have a definition. At the time, there was an acupuncture course that was being created. Interesting enough, it wasn't part of Colorado State, but it was by a program associated with their continuing education. It wasn't part of the curriculum. So I did that and really enjoyed it. And I became a teacher's assistant for a couple more classes, but it was driving down from Jackson all the way down to Fort Collins. So, long way, over 400 miles. And, at the time I had the little Subaru Legacy, in the snow on I-80, all the things that went on with that very adventurous time.
Medication.
And then, yeah.
That's no cakewalk, I-80.
Oh my God.
The worst highway in the country.
And then the veterinary homeopathic course was actually being held in Boulder, Colorado in, I think it was 2003. And I'd always wanted to take that. And so I was doing all these courses, but it was all it was like going back to vet school, and taking a lot of resources to do it, which, and I was trying to work in between. I got in a lot of debt, just lots of things happened, but it was like a really adventurous time. And then when I started with homeopathy, this is where I want to be. And I knew, even though I didn't understand it, my grandfather on my mother's side he was a homeopath, he was a doctor. And I didn't know much about it. He had died before I really got to know what his practice was about, but it was and then I found out there was 5 other male relatives that had gone to the Hahnemann Medical School in Philadelphia. That's where my family roots are, in Philadelphia area. So it was sort of like, that's really interesting, and it just sort of built on that. And then I just really felt like it sunk in. So from there I built on, I was doing these other holistic modalities, which are like acupuncture, chiropractic, herbal, there was herbal. So they're all like different parts of what is called holism, because you're trying to treat the whole patient. That's the idea. Mm-hmm. But homeopathy is it's quite different. It's quite specific. So that's where I focused later. Dr. Hahnemann, he was the considered founder of homeopathy, the homeopathy thought.
Okay.
He was a doctor. He was actually a pharmacist in Germany, and he developed the principles more, the idea of treating like with like, or the Greek word homeopathy, which is disease, was not new, but he developed the whole method exquisitely, and it's very methodical. and he is at the time, it was interesting when you read his original works, which is called The Organon of Medicine. You know, it's human, but it applies to every living thing on our planet. He was dealing with the same issues with medicine that was called allopathy or conventional. You know, at the time they were dealing with people that were being bled when they were sick. Like, you know, George Washington died of being bled out too much blood. You know, that's how fevers were treated in really odd ways. They were given poultices or all sorts of toxic things. I mean, it's similar in a way to today if you're going into treating chronic disease or anything really, but it was just that's at the time what they were using. So he developed this through hundreds of years. So he started this in the late 1700s. He lived in Germany. Eventually he lived in Paris. And then from there, the whole practitioners, I mean, we always joke about calling them the old dead white guys, but there were more and more women coming along. Finally, they were acknowledged. In general, homeopathy was one of the first medical profession that acknowledged women as part of their membership.
Really?
So that became more obvious around the turn of into the 19th century into the 20th century. So it's interesting, the history of it. It's when I find more and more, there's a lot in there. And then they always dealt with epidemics. There was epidemics, you know, and now that we're in the middle of a quote pandemic, homeopaths have treated these problems in human issues and animal issues for hundreds of years. So it's just interesting, like when you see, you know, it's not well known, but the mortality rates of the homeopaths was so low compared to the allopaths, you know, using things like, then aspirin was a big deal. And yet aspirin was not helping people with a lot of these infectious diseases. Now in the hospitals, we're getting Tylenol, you know, ibuprofen and all sorts of other anti-inflammatories that are, you know, it goes against the body's ability to respond. So that's, you know, that's sort of an idea. So with homeopathy, you're using the whole patient or the symptoms of the patient to guide you to find a match of a like medicine, that if they prove the medicine, which is what Hahnemann did very, very methodically, and a lot of other provers in the last hundreds of years. That's why we have homeopathic medicines. They know exactly what these medicines do. So when you are presented with a patient that has symptoms, even though they aren't, you know, it wasn't because of they took a homeopathic medicine, they match them. So it's the idea of similars. It's not the idea of matching exactly. So what that does is that medicine displaces the disease or the symptoms so that the body then on its own heals. These are diluted medicines. They're very diluted past, there's no molecular substance left. So people, when they hear that a lot of these substances are, they come from toxic things, like some of our main foundational remedies of the materia medica are like arsenic or, you know, strychnine and, you know, things like that, that come out from plants or from minerals or from, you know, and sometimes animal sources or disease processes. So there's a lot of misunderstanding of homeopathy, and that's why we get demonized.
It's very interesting. Let's go on to your customers, your clients, what your animals.
My patients.
What type of, your patients. Yeah. What type of patients? I mean, who are they?
Well, there's one right over there.
Yes, that's right. But aside from dogs.
You know, he's been well. So we haven't had to, I mean, you managed a lot of his things with lifestyle things, which.
Well, and I credit you to help us through that, because he ended up a few years ago with some kind of rash.
Oh, we get a lot of skin expressions.
Yes, he did. And I had an instinct that just from my background in yoga and Ayurvedic medicine, I said to my husband that this is something we're feeding him. This has got to be nutritional. So
there's a whole, I mean, a lot of, you know, I work a lot, the homeopathic vets and doctors are usually very much aware of hygiene. Hygiene means diet, you know, obstacles that, you know, we get presented with, whether it could be a lot of stress, poor living environment, toxins in the food. I mean, in Max's case, a lot of our commercial foods are very full of accumulated contaminations. I mean, it's like our own food supply, right? So,
Mhm.
I mean, they may not be dealing with so much, like hopefully not eating a lot of processed sugar, but they're eating things that chemicals have been sprayed on the things that the animals ate, or if, you know, if you're feeding, you know, lots, there's other many ingredients in commercial product. So yeah, so it's very much, there's a lot of that. So all these things contribute to a mistunement or an imbalance in health. Inflammation is the causation of a lot of symptoms. And, you know, even though they're never, rarely are they infections nowadays, you know, that's why there's so much overuse of antibiotics. So a lot of these things are inflammatory things, everything from many of the bladder conditions, the dogs that are vomiting. Skin is usually just inflammation. And then they get sometimes secondary infections, but that's never the primary cause. Rarely.
You said you do treat dogs, but what other animals do you treat?
Kitty cats. The birds that have, like me, and I keep a little bottle of arnica by my window. So when the birds, if they do hit the window, I try to rescue them and give them arnica, and, you know, dissolve like some pellets of arnica dissolved in a little dropper bottle. Often it really helps them. I've done, you know, I work with horses and cattle and sheep and occasionally birds. I mean, even there's agrohomeopathy. You can work with gardens. I mean, that's a whole, you've probably heard of Rudolf Steiner
Mhm.
and a lot of those agrohomeopathic. It's a whole system of, it's almost like a belief system, but Steiner did a lot of work with rejuvenating soils and regenerative farming. And he, you know, was a German homeopath, and he practiced homeopathy used it on plants. I wish I would like to learn a lot more about that. I've dabbled in it with my own garden. Can't say I'm very successful with it, but anything that has a life force pretty much can be treated homeopathically. And, you know, then humans, of course, I mean, we base our materia medica on the provings in humans, but with the experience and more experience of veterinarians working, we understand more of the more specifics of animals. I mean, that's why if somebody were to work with a better homeopath, it would be really good if they were actually a veterinarian, because what goes on to that is another layer. Often we understand the remedies that are needed, mostly that come up when the animals are really made sick from vaccines and, you know, other things and toxins.
What are some of the primary differences between homeopathic treatments versus conventional
Yeah,
veterinary
good
treatment?
question, Julie. I mean, a lot. It's like 180 different.
Yeah.
You know, like what's
Question.
conventional medicine is really wonderful if there's an emergency or if you've been in an accident. I mean, to a point, you know, like you're about to die, you know, like you need life-saving support, and then, or supportive care. You know, we have those understandings of those techniques, and that's more like an acute condition. Allo means using a different substance to treat a disease, whereas homeo means treating like and like. So I'll use those two terms. With chronic disease, which is really most of our illnesses now, really, the differences are allopathic approach uses one drug to treat one symptom. So you're using, you know, the aspirin for the fever, the quote, an antibiotic for supposed infection, the autoimmune or the immune suppressant for what they think is something that's out of control, inflammation, the cough suppressant to stop the cough, whereas the cough is there for a reason. You know, certainly it gets very exaggerated. The anti-diarrheal, you know, it slows down the peristalsis, so that the reason that the diarrhea is there, so you can flush out probably the toxins. But when people are really sick with it, when there's cholera, you know, you need to treat it. Whereas homeopathic, and so there are many drugs used in one patient. In homeopathic approach, you're using all the symptoms of the patient to match one medicine. This is the Hahnemannian approach, or classical. There is other forms of homeopathy out there. There's other practitioners that use multiple remedies, and that's really not homeopathy. I'll be a bit snooty on that, but it's not homeopathy. It's sort of, it's used as being sort of allopathic. And there's all these combination remedies. They're not, I don't use them. I don't recommend them. Sometimes they might help, you know, if you're really not sure of the symptoms, or somebody they can buy them, you know, and try them. Sometimes maybe one of the remedies that are in them works. But the true the way that homeopathy is designed is to use one remedy to match all the symptoms of the patient, mental, emotional, locational, things that cause aggravate, what it is that builds that expression of that patient. So one remedy takes them to that phase of healing. I mean, you might need a series of remedies. Usually you do in chronic disease.
But it seems like it's
So you
not
do one at a time.
fits all. It's that you're taking a look
It's
at
individualized medicine, you're right.
Yes,
Julie,
and
it
that's
is.
what I love about it, is you're not just like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that. That's what we're so used to. Like, okay, it's sort of like, let's say I get a patient with cancer or a tumor. They go, well, this is a mast cell tumor. What remedy is that? You go, well, it's not like you're treating the pathology. You're saying, well, what about the patient's, what's the patient's emotional state? What is else the patient? Is the patient drinking a lot of water? Does the patient want to seek out warm or cold? Those things are really just as important, or not more. That gives you the picture, the painting of that patient that will, once they get the right, of course, you need to know that there's tumors in that remedy. I mean, that kind of remedy could form these tumors or be part of that. But that one remedy then will take all those things into account. And that's usually the things that'll give you the most information. When I get really advanced pathology situations, by then it doesn't, there's just too much pathology. You've got to go back on if there is any unique things to the patient. Oftentimes, sadly, there's not, because they've already been treated. Now, those are really hard, and we don't do too well with those. They're pretty sick, and you do the best you can. But sometimes the animal is still expressing symptoms, and they have a decent life force, and you can still work with it.
So I wanted to ask you about the two areas of, veterinary medicine and how they work together. But
Yeah, well, can they?
Yeah.
Well, conventional and homeopathic work together?
Well, I mean, I was saying that the difference in, if you have a patient, okay, here's an example of a cat that is in renal failure, has advanced kidney disease. It helps if the animal gets, like, this is sort of more conventional, if they get supportive fluid therapy, because they need help to flush their toxins out of their body because their kidneys aren't working. That's sort of conventional, but it's also supportive care. In that sense, it can. But usually what I get is they're on like already a suppressive drug, and you're trying to fight it. Like you want that to find that life force left in that patient. But if they're on a prednisone, or if they're on a common drug that's in veterinary medicine now is Apoquel for the skin itching. There's so much skin disease now, and I can tell you why. But I mean, or another thing like cyclosporin, that's an immune suppressant. You can't really do that together. You can wean them. You try to wean them off.
Yeah.
But sometimes the animals are so sick, but they're so suppressed from that, they can't rally a response, and it takes a long time because they're sick.
Yeah, you're basically just putting a Band-Aid on it.
Yeah, or you're just, you're kind of, it's sort of, they're alive, but they're not in a good health state. And unfortunately, sometimes what happens is when they start to feel better, they'll express more symptoms like itching, and people don't like it, but they're feeling better. Okay. And finally they're able to mount some response back, but then they want to suppress the itch again. I'm like, you got to let them sort of get through this. As long as they're feeling okay, they're eating finally. A lot of times they won't eat. They're really sick, even though they may not be itching. Mm-hmm. But when they finally feel better and they want to run around and do well, then they start to itch a little more, or their ears get inflamed again. That's like a return of symptoms. And then the humans don't like it. Of course they don't. They don't like it because it's what they were struggling with. So it can be really frustrating.
So are you saying that skin disease is the #1 issue with animals today?
No, well, it's a lot of it. I mean, there's a lot of
one of the main issues.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of it that there's so many levels of it. I mean, it could go on and a whole talk about it. It's really, and it's very hard because we want to suppress it because we don't like our animals to scratch or itch, and a lot of the triggers are continual vaccines and the, contamination in the diet, poor environment, breeding, lots of things.
What best practices can you offer someone who has just acquired a new kitty or a new puppy? They're brand new, they're young, they're just babies.
they often will have come with already vaccines. I try to, help people, and I say empower them, to give them the choices to understand what's really going on, because vaccines are sort of like this in conventional medicine. They think it's preventive. Well, it's sort of preventive. I mean, if vaccines work, they're supposed to provide help the body do antibody response if they're presented with that disease, like let's say parvo in dogs. I mean, it can be a deadly disease, but they can be treated homeopathically with it. But I mean, as far as like, you don't want them to get it, but if they've already come with a vaccine, I try to say, think about this, try to get the animal healthy first with good diet, get them used to your surroundings, and then maybe consider another booster or maybe in a vaccine titer. That just shows if there's a presence of antibodies down the line. But in the meantime, you do probably need to minimize exposure, because the young animals are more susceptible to those viruses. So same with cats and their diseases. So you try to like get it to the point where you should not vaccinate an animal that's not well, but they get through that bar because everybody thinks they should just have the vaccine. And a lot of these animals already have diarrhea. They're not eating well, and they still get vaccinated. And then they get sicker and sicker, or their skin starts to get inflamed. And then that's when it starts a lot of times. A lot of times I get cases, they've been itching since they're a puppy. Well, what happened to them? They got vaccinated, plus they've been on, really poor diet. So that's where it starts. And then it just gets worse down the road. So you can just try to pull them back from it, let them get healthy, maybe do a titer, start, understand maybe, what could be better nutrition.
You used to offer titers, and you no longer do that. But so now we have to seek them through conventional vets.
Right, they're available.
I've had titers done on Max in the past, and it's interesting because what I've done is I send the results to Mary Beth, but I also, obviously the vet's going to give me an analysis of the titer too. Well, the conventional vet will more likely say, well, he's a little low on this antibody. Maybe you need to give him a booster. And then you ask Mary Beth, she says, no, it's still circulating in his system. He's okay.
Well, it's just a number, right? It's just a number.
Yes.
And it shows that he's actually showing that's just one measure of immunity. There's so many others. Is he healthy? The less he's vaccinated, the more healthy he is. I mean, I'm just going to say that, if he's active, he looks healthy, he's in good weight, he's active, that's health. That means he has it's like us. If we don't have all these underlying things going on, we're going to fight off it's like, we don't give the body credit that we have an immune system. I mean, there are people that have challenges for that, and so are animals. But if you try your best, that's the idea of it, is to provide that system to help you if you're presented with viruses. I mean, we're in the middle of it as humans right now. It's a big deal. And it's not just like we have to be healthy. It's not just about the vaccine. That's why you see a varying response of who gets sick and who doesn't.
Right.
Well, any advice that you could give an animal that's adopted at a later stage in life?
Sure, Julie. I mean, a lot of times, you don't know a lot of detail of what happened to that animal or what the conditions were, what if they had issues, unless they were adopted and given up because they had arthritis or the person couldn't take care of them. Then there's issues on adoption.
Mm-hmm.
You can do the same thing as with a puppy or a kitten. Just do your best to give them, a good home and, outside time, good diet that's not as overly processed. If there are medications, look at critically what could be needed. Maybe you can consult with a holistic vet or a homeopath about that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one thing I do, I'm a huge supporter, I should say, of just good food. And our dog is no longer with us. We had him up until he was 17, and the diet made such a difference. Such a difference. Even though, he was on hospice, I think just, the food that we prepared You could, and we didn't know a lot back then. I mean,
Mhm.
we made a lot of
You
changes.
made your food, you made the food and it didn't come out, wasn't processed. Sure.
Wow. Or if someone would watch him and give him wrong food, you would see such a difference in
Mhm.
his state compared to when he was getting the food that he needed to.
Yeah, that's neat. I mean, it's like I said, it's similar to a young animal. You try to provide the best in your knowledge, in your knowledge space. I mean, that's how we learn too. Like I know there's a lot of, when I work with somebody that their animal has died, they go, I wish I knew that then. You go, well, they were there to help, you know. Me too. I mean, my previous dogs, I go, gosh, I can kick myself for what I didn't know.
Yeah, things you would have done different, because there are so many types of food available in the market. So how do you determine what is best for your pet?
I know, and it's a big topic, you guys. I mean, it's not simple. So my kind of journey was after seeing some issues with some of the way the foods were fed and the problems as I learned more about the food supply. I mean, let's just stick with dogs. I mean, cats are kind of a different topic, but if I remember, I'll touch back on that. But dogs are really not obligate carnivores. They're omnivores like we are, and they can adapt very well to a lot of variety of foods. They have the ability to change their digestive power and their microbiome. Dogs are not little wolves. I mean, they're domesticated. They come from they share 99% plus of the genetic code, but that just shows how malleable they are. And look at the different kinds of breeds of dogs. I mean, what about a pug or a shih tzu is like a wolf? They don't even do the same thing. They're not. So the sort of idea that, well, feed your little wolf, well, they're not little wolves. I mean, it didn't take that long in the whole history of humans and animals, but they change pretty quickly. If you look back even now, like on breed standards, to even 100 years ago, like bulldogs do not look the same as bulldogs today. I mean, we have French bulldogs now, and we have a lot of breeds that have changed their physical structure dramatically so that it's a health hazard. We have a lot, I mean, as cute as they are, we have a lot of dogs that can't breathe right, or their legs and their backs are not conducive to supporting them, or if they easily get hurt, spinal injuries and things. It's not good, and feeding them, assuming that they're wolves, is really not the correct way to think about it. Somewhere like and then now the trend is sort of dominantly, there's a lot of feeding a lot of meat, whether it's in a kibble or a processed or raw, which if it's, there's nothing wrong with that, but wolves don't even eat that much meat. So where I'm going with this is the way our agricultural system is, and the meat where it comes from, the meat itself is really not wild, and it's not healthy the way that it's produced. I mean, I use the term bioaccumulation. So that cow gets fed a lot of GMO grain. It has a lot of sprayed pesticides and glyphosate on it, and it gets processed with a lot of antibiotics and feedlots, and then it gains a lot of weight. It's abnormal for the animal, and then all that stuff does accumulate into the muscle meat. Especially, like, look at chickens. They don't last very long, and chicken is really the commonest food. It's commonest meat protein there is. And I mean, I guess I would say I'm not at all against saying not feeding meat, but I'm saying you could feed a dog a lot lower on the food chain or plant-based and the dog would be very healthy. My own dog is plant-based. He does not eat meat. And he's a cattle dog, active, muscular, whatever. So, and then, there are animals that I think it also comes down, I want to say that if you find a good food supply, like a good meat supply, and then you learn how to combine foods and feed a variety of foods, there's nothing wrong with feeding meat, but you do your best to find the best sources if you can find it. It's problematic nowadays. Our organic standards have eroded. everybody drinks the same water and air, it's in the same, it's not pure, so you do your best to try to feed as cleanly as possible. That's what I'm trying to say.
I
And then
want
also-
to ask you about, did you start your dog on a vegetarian diet, a plant-based diet from a puppy?
he came from a shelter, and he was on a commercial diet, and so he was on a high meat commercial, one of
How
those
long did it take you to transition the dog?
like a day.
Oh, they're just
I mean,
hungry and they'll
it
just eat
wasn't
anything.
really a big deal. I mean, I was just like, also, and tough to tell you, I was also very much into the high meat feeding. That's where I had arrived. And Sharon, you probably knew me more. You were part of my transition. I mean, then when I talked to you later, I was saying, like, with Max's issues, let's try to feed lower on the food chain. And it did really help him.
It did.
And you also did more. You were always doing home prepared more with your dogs. You were.
That's all we do now.
Yeah.
There's
right.
no more process.
Right. So I'm saying it, there's a middle of the road. What I'm trying to say is, like, a lot of these, like, I really, there's a lot of problems with fish now. Fish is so contaminated, and there's so much radiation in the sea. I mean, this is where cats get really sick. This is why we're seeing a lot of really weird metabolism disorders and hyperthyroidism and stuff like that.
Okay.
So it's really problematic, but fish is sort of in a lot of ingredients now.
Let's just pivot to cats for a moment, because we will have some cat
Sure, people, yeah,
customers
understandably.
here, viewers.
Mhm.
What do they feed their cat?
Well, I try to say, if you can home prepare for them, but select your meat. I mean, try to get organic, stay away from fish. But cats can be they can eat grains, they can eat starches, they're more carnivorous in their choices, but they can actually, I have some clients that have plant-based cats, and they started them from a kitten. And you do use some supplementation, just like any diet that you would buy. They do have supplements in them. With a high meat diet, you're still supplementing. There's not enough minerals that are in the right balance. You have to do that. I mean, if you had, like, lived on a farm and you had your own beef, if that dog got some of that, that's great, but not just meat. You could have a variety of foods. They can eat, back to dogs, I mean, they can eat about everything human can. Cats are a lot more, can be more difficult. They don't have a lot of, their taste is they go by smell a lot, and they don't have a lot of taste buds compared to, like, a dog. And so,
Okay.
and then sometimes when I get a cat patient, they're already sick and they're not eating well anyway. It's really hard to transition them. But there are cat foods out there that have a lot less meat or plant-based. If there's one in particular that's very palatable, a lot of it is the palatability. There are recipes for cats like that. You can make homemade food for cats that have meat, but again, it's that freshness. It's freshness, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
What about kibble?
Yeah,
Because we no longer feed Max kibble,
right.
but there's good kibble out there.
There
right?
is, and I do recommend it. I try to, if people are going to feed, I mean, it is convenient. It's not all bad. I mean, there are some that's really not good. So, I mean, my own dog, I will feed some plant-based kibble. There's more companies becoming, because people are really getting it, that it's really helping their animals to feed plant-based. And so there's some main companies, there's new upstarts now, and the animals are doing very well, and it's palatable. Then there's also, if you find a kibble that uses just like meat sources and not all this meal from all the grinding up of all the animal parts that, who knows. We also know that a lot of these products have just animals that were sick and animals that were euthanized in there. This is where a lot of the chemicals and the contamination comes in. That's one choice of drug contamination. That's a known.
Yeah.
It's been like that for a long time, sadly. And so the more that you get consecrated, so back to, I'll try to make it as simple as I can. It's really difficult. There's a big grain-free thing. That started, it wasn't a veterinary recommended diet. It came from pet food producers. Somehow grains have become very demonized. And then it just turned into this whole, like, it's better to feed just meat or just something with the kibble is held together by some pea protein or whatever, and then they got demonized. Not about the meat, forget it. They're not even looking at the meat. I mean, by testing, they know that a lot of these kibbles have contamination in them. They're not at all advertised that way. Of course not. They wouldn't sell the kibble if they knew how much heavy metals like arsenic and mercury were in them. But I mean, you have to kind of know your food and get an idea. And that's why I really say, as a quick one, try to stay away from a lot of the fish things. I mean, chicken can be really problematic, but back to the kibble, there are good ones. So there's nothing wrong with feeding some kibble, and there are some good canned. I mean, it's hard enough to get through the day. We don't have the time, to do all this, but you can also, there's ways to just feed whole foods. Like, you don't have to make into recipes, like feed a baked potato, or, use some canned, what we do with back, some black beans, and, mash them up really well. Use some whole, like, a lot of times when I get an animal that's not really feeling well, try to feed them something simple to digest. Things like oatmeal or yams or cooked potatoes, ways to flavor them.
You say cooked potatoes, or do you white potatoes too?
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the starches, there's a lot of misinformation. Like, I know a lot of holistic vets that are very much into the raw meat feeding. They think that's really bad. So it's hard for somebody that's just trying to figure it out to get, and if they talk to somebody, whether it's me or, somebody that's very much into the raw meat feeding, how would they know that? Our whole dietary band with humans is very much carbophobic. Why? I don't know. I mean, they've been around. This is how our how people have evolved. Agrarian cultures. They didn't eat a lot of meat. So
right.
It's just interesting. I
It
mean,
is
unless they
interesting.
lived in Antarctica or something, or in Northern Europe. I mean, they had to eat animals to survive.
Well, I think you make a really strong point about, well, if you're on a farm and what you're feeding that animal, that's different. Where the
Mhm.
source of that meat is coming
Best
from
you can.
versus as
Or the eggs, or the chicken eggs, or
right.
right, or or you growing vegetables.
There are a lot of people that can't, not
Home prepare.
necessarily can't
Sure.
afford all of this, or can home prepare. Can you do a little bit of both?
Yeah.
And
Easy.
and then also perhaps maybe you can make some suggestions for some brands that you're
Can I
recommending.
do that on here?
Oh, yes, of
Um,
course you can. We're not sponsoring anybody, and it's
Mhm.
it's free. I think what we should do is that maybe at the end of the show, we'll post that. You send me some of the suggestions, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
I think
Right. That would be how I recommend to clients, like, to help them
yes.
try this.
Yeah,
And
those resources, because you don't know, what
hard to find them. A lot
recommend.
of times you go to your pet store, food store, and they don't have that kind of thing too. So a lot of times it is online.
Okay.
Sometimes, sadly, some of the things, I mean, believe it or not, you can get some of these things on Amazon, but sometimes they don't have them. So that's another thing that you have to sort of figure out too. More and more people are demanding them or seeing the benefits. There'll be more companies and more supply, hopefully.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm beginning to see that now.
Yeah.
Obviously don't know who to trust and who not to trust. I
know.
would rather go to somebody who counsels pet owners on nutrition.
Right. And when I have an animal and it is not well, sometimes, you have to work with it slowly, and sometimes they don't take to it right away, or they might, because they're depleted, they may not digest it well at first. You have to learn how, you have to work with that, and there's ways to do it correctly.
What if, okay, you just picked up a new puppy, and so this is what they fed them. Can you just make a 180 and just start feeding them
If the
anything
puppy
you
is
want?
eating really pretty well and acting, okay, sure. I mean, you can do 1/3 of the new and 2/3 of the old.
Okay, I just wondered if
In a week,
that was
yeah.
a necessity. Do you
Yeah.
need, without
Not really.
upsetting
I mean, and
digestive
here's another
tract
thing that
for her?
happens too, that kind of people don't understand, but the digestion will have to change. And so sometimes you get a little diarrhea, but it's almost like they have to detox it. They kind of,
Oh,
but if you
it's
get
good
too
to
much
know.
of it, because they just got vaccinated and their immune system is a little inflamed, you have to work with that too.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, if they have trouble, but a lot of times they'll have a little loose stool, or they'll or they might vomit or something, then they're fine.
Yeah.
They just like getting rid of the old.
Okay, make way for the new.
Yeah.
Okay, so vaccines. Well, that's a controversial subject.
Oh boy. Yeah, it's hard.
And not only in the human,
Yeah, all around.
with the human species, but so what do you advise?
Go to your conventional vet, you will get boosters because number one, that's how they're taught. And unless they've seen issues with it, and they make a lot of money on it, right? I mean,
Of
just being
course.
real.
I know. Yeah.
And also the vaccine companies haven't done what we call duration of immunity studies past, let's say, they went to 3 years to say, oh, their immunity lasts 3 years. But in truth, for a carnivore, a dog, a canine, if you if you waited until they were more mature as a puppy, let's say around 16 weeks, 20 weeks, gave them one core, like the core vaccines,
Mhm.
or like the Stamper, Parvo, maybe adenoma or adenovirus, which is supposedly still around and helps not have a hepatitis. Those are considered core. If you just did one of those and, not all the other things that are attached to those vaccines, he probably has lifelong immunity. And this is supported by immunologists that fortunately they have arrows in their back, like anybody that stands up and said, this is really how it works. It's like us. We don't keep getting.
We don't get boosters.
Yeah, like childhood diseases and, like they want to give us a lot of stuff just to make money. But like with dog issues, I mean, so we try to do then you just stop it. I mean, the good thing is you're not recommended by law to continue those boosters. You just go to your regular vet.
Except for rabies.
Right. Rabies is a hard one because it is considered, I mean, it is a zoonosis. People can get rabies. So, but what they're trying to do with the Rabies Challenge Fund that Dr. Jean Dodds and some other immunologists and hematologists and veterinary immunologists are trying to conduct is really looking at really how long the duration of immunity lasts and to push those recommendations out farther than every 3 years. So initially what conventional vet will say is, well, your puppy has to be vaccinated under a year of age once with a vaccine. Then they have to have a booster in a year, and it's the same exact serum. It's not the 1 year, 3 year. It's the same thing, although it's marketed as that. And then they say you have to get it every 3 years, no matter how old they are, this is where you get into trouble. This is where you get into chronic accumulations of things. So it's hard because it's considered you have to do that to get a license, or some veterinary practices won't see your dog if you don't have it.
Right.
It's hard to navigate that. My recommendation is to people, like, if you do that initial one, really just do one vaccine at a time. Watch your dog, make sure they're healthy to receive it. This is what's not understood. It says on the vaccine vial, only to be given to a healthy animal. I mean, truly, what is a healthy animal anymore? I mean, or a human.
Mhm.
But that's how you can also get around it when you get pushed by your vet to say, you have to have a vaccine. Well, if they're being treated for anything, hypothyroidism, cancer, growths, diarrhea, then you're not healthy to get a booster. And then you push it out and you get away with it.
Right.
You get under the radar with it.
Right.
And also, I mean, I wish it wasn't so rigid, but some municipalities are very rigid. Some of them aren't. There are some states and areas that are accepting titers in lieu of vaccination of rabies.
Oh, that's
The
interesting.
Boulder area is, and some other, it's a
Why am I
municipality.
not surprised to hear that it's the
I know,
Boulder
I'm
area?
not either, but I mean, I tried in Teton County and stuff, but it's hard. But I'm not saying not to give the vaccine. I mean, because it is but you also have to look at what your risk is in the area. I mean, there's not a whole lot of rabies in northern Wyoming, but if you're in Southeast US, you have to kind of consider that. There are, the animals that carry rabies are like raccoons, skunks.
Mhm.
That the bat rabies is controversial because it's not the same virus. So people get really wigged out about bats. Like now they get really wigged out about bats who think they're bad. They're not.
Mhm.
But it's not the same thing. So you just have to kind of have some levity about that.
Mhm.
It's hard because it's a fearful thing, just like what we're living in.
Thank you. That was really educational.
Learning.
Well, it's not helpful if you're getting pressed by to do it. You have to but I try to, I mean, usually I get the animals that are really sick and I say no more vaccines, period. That's it. You just have to
Right.
stop it
Right.
because the animal's health, it's going to be damaged. They might die. There's a lot of pressure
Unconventional.
sadly with that. And it's been really hard, and you have to really get a backbone about it and say no.
Right. What tips can you provide in caring for a senior pet?
It would be the same, like the same sort of recommendations of whatever age appropriate exercise, interest in other things, getting them, if it means just going out in the yard, that's fine, if they're not really that mobile. But there's that also, let them go out and sniff, and if that's what they want to do, or there's ways to figure out what that senior likes to do. And the food would be probably, you'd maybe want to do a little more cooking of the food, more digestible, easier to digest food. If there's a weight issue, I have to say, as a plug to plant-based feeding, usually the animals that are eating more plant-based are much leaner.
Right.
Unless you're giving lots of treats and lots of peanut butter or something like that, but
Yeah.
like anything. And try, of course, don't vaccinate them anymore.
Oh, what about teeth cleaning?
Teeth cleaning, yeah, that's always a case by case. You have to assess where the animal is, and teeth cleaning is pushed a lot, just like vaccines, because it makes the veterinarians a lot of money. But it also is a good thing to do. I try to look at the animals over an inflammatory issue. Like a lot of these kitty cats have really, really, really badly inflamed mouths, and that's because of their vaccines and their inflammation and their diet a lot of times. But it's hard to turn it around, and they lose teeth. Cleaning the teeth sometimes helps, sometimes it doesn't really. And a lot of animals will just naturally accumulate some tartar. They don't use these canine teeth, to chew. It just is more like staining. If it's really inhibiting or causing gum inflammation, then a dental cleaning with anesthesia is probably worth the risk. A lot of times that you can definitely, if the animal will chew like a dog, there are, back to the plant-based, there are some plant-based chews that are really pretty good. Sometimes, I'll say, well, then use a raw bone, like a raw. My dog found an antler on his own and he chews on that.
Right.
It's like it is that chewing for, friction, that it does help. And dogs like to chew. Cats, it's a little harder.
Right.
There's not a lot. I mean, brushing teeth, I have to say, I don't like it and I don't do it. And I can't make my clients do it. If they want to do it, go ahead.
Yeah. We tried that for a little while, but yeah.
I don't know. I mean, sometimes I think, if an animal is trained that way to do it, and you're really good about the routine, and you make it fun, like a good dentifrice, you could try. Let's say you got some accumulation, or they kind of have some bad gunky, the breath is bad for a period, or it smells to us bad. Maybe it doesn't smell bad to them. Is just take some coconut oil, like kind of get it and mix in a little sea salt.
Okay.
Just a teeny bit of baking soda. Just sort of make a dentifrice out of that. And you can take a gauze and just kind of rub it in there.
Good
And
idea.
that, coconut oil is naturally antibacterial, and it kind of tastes good, but yeah, it'll help with that. The friction is in the salt and the baking. So you can use a gauze and kind of rub, and that a lot of times that'll help a little bit.
Okay. Or can you just put it on your finger and?
Yeah, you can do it that way. The gauze is sometimes it gets it on there and you can rub a little bit. Or those little, those little finger toothbrushes.
Oh, sure.
Those little things that have the little bristle things on them.
Okay.
That's funny. Even I use a little baking soda and coconut for.
Oh, I do too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't really use commercial toothpaste anymore. I mean,
Yeah, I mix that and.
Yeah, and the coconut oil, I mean, some people are really into you can, do a coconut oil. It does. I mean, if you have some, gum inflammation, it's really good for that. Yeah. I mean, a lot of times, like animals that have some like kind of gut, ears that are a little bit dischargy or greasy, you can just use a little coconut oil and clean it out. It's gentle. It's sort of an emollient. It helps pull out the wax.
Sure. I lather up with coconut oil in the shower all the time. That's what I do. I don't use soap, and I walk out and Max is waiting for me.
He like licks your legs. I know. Like,
So
yeah.
I let him lick me dry. That I do. If that's gross to you, get over it.
I love it. Personal disclosure, Sharon.
Be very careful if you step into Sharon's shower.
Yeah.
Just
Yes, I
yeah, don't
do.
fall down.
Yes, I do forewarn everybody. Yeah.
Uh,
Up to this point, Jerry hasn't taken a fall, and neither have I. What if somebody wants to consult with
Sure.
a holistic vet?
They can
You have to-
contact me via email, Sharon. I mean, I just go by what my schedule is. You know,
Okay.
it is case by case, so it's individual, and I don't. It depends on where I am. Like sometimes I'm really backlogged, and so it might be a wait.
Any other resources that you could suggest?
There's a website called the Academy of Veterinary Homeopathy. That's specific to homeopathic veterinarians that have been trained and that practice varying degrees of homeopathy. And also, I think did I put in, Sharon, Dr. Pitcairn has a similar page. He has a
I think you
referral
did.
page. And then he has a page of health consultants that do just telephone work. But what it does is these they have a referral thing, so you can look for a vet that could be in your area. Sadly, there's not enough of us to go. There's not a lot of homeopaths. There's probably 500 less in North America. So we do end up doing
Wow.
consultations on the phone, a lot of us.
Mm.
And with homeopathy lends itself to that. And because people can purchase remedies. And now with the whole issue with COVID, I mean, it sort of helped, it sort of validated
Right.
telemedicine. I mean, we've been doing that. It's not like illegal, but we do have to be careful per state, whatever our state licensing is, just to be a little bit careful about that kind of thing, because they want to have that patient relationship. But a lot of times that's not possible because people in that one area don't have somebody that's qualified and they're too far away to go have an exam.
Right.
So we've been doing this, and you can work really well with that. You can do a lot of pictures. You can, if you really want to do a Zoom call, you could do that. You know,
Mhm.
you can search by your locality on those lists.
Okay.
To find one.
All right. I think that's very
And
helpful.
they're and it explains the training, you know, like why they're on the list and what our training is,
Okay.
what that means.
We are so in gratitude of you being on the show.
You know, I'm really, honored, and I hope it helps, people be
Oh.
empowered. You know, it's about learning and, it's like having options,
Yes. So much
all
so.
of our pets. So whatever we can do to just care.
Oh,
for
I know. I mean, that's a lot of times what will bring us to more health ourselves,
them.
like
Yes.
options. Mhm,
Yes. So true, especially during these stressful times.
mhm.
You want to hug your vet.
Max looks like he's doing well back there.
He lasted the whole show. I can't believe it. He's just chilled. He's just chilled. He says maybe she'll give me some more.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mary Beth.
Pleasure meeting you. Thank
Right,
you so
you too.
much.
Thank
We'll
you.
keep in touch, and good luck with your life changes.
Okay. Take care.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Ah,
Oh, that was fantastic.
isn't she
Wow,
wonderful?
what a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah. So I did pull a quote in our show today, and it relates to, of course, our subject. And the quote is, "Until one has loved an animal, a part of one's soul remains unawakened." And that's by Anatole France.
Ah,
Isn't that beautiful?
it is beautiful.
Really beautiful. Well, everybody, thanks for joining us. Sayonara.
Bye. Cheers.
Ciao. Cheers. Cheers to you.